I have to give him credit for that. The skill on display here is impressive. I'm just worried about something serious happening eventually. All right, so a local HEMA instructor sent me this video to comment on. And it's one of those things that make you sit there like, why though? Now, this is not fencing with sharp blades and no protection, but I still feel compelled to, before even starting to play the video, say, do not do this. I don't condone this sort of practice. It's not safe, and there's no good reason to do it. Obviously, these guys disagree with that, but that's just my opinion. Except, I guess they do agree because they themselves tell people to not do it. So, yeah, I appreciate the disclaimer. Let's see, so what they're using are replicas of a 16th century fencing sword, what you would call a Federschwert or feather sword. It's a literal translation. Blades are semi-sharp. The rules are no thrusting, obviously, with basically no protective gear. That would be extremely dumb, even without a point. No grappling, no intentional strikes to joints. Intentional. But of course, in the heat of the moment, things happen. That's why you wear joint protection. You can't just be like, well, don't hit me in the elbow, bro. And then if it happens, then what? Now you have a fractured elbow. So in history, there were duels and kind of sport fencing to first blood. This strikes me as a bit odd to go for the first high head wound that bleeds onto the shirt. That seems a bit excessive. Rather than just any kind of bleeding scalp cut or whatever, it has to be enough to drip onto the shirt, and it has to be the head, which seems like a really bad idea to me without protection. The problem is, in order to get a shallow bleeding cut with a mostly blunt blade, you have to go for the head to crush the skin between the skull and the blade. On meatier parts of the body, you would need a sharp blade. But of course, blunt impact trauma to the head carries the most risk. I'll get back to that, but first, let's take a look at how it goes. I wonder what they've trained in. It's like I can already see that clearly they have HEMA experience. I'm guessing Meyer. Oh wait, that was a contact to the forearm. Okay, it was a, yeah. Strike with the flat, so a prellhau, if you will, or bouncing strike. Hit marker would be nice, but from what I'm seeing, it's this. So the blade is dropping down onto the left guy's head. That's probably it. Yeah. And by the way, I'm cranking down the saturation. That's like pseudo censorship, because with YouTube's lack of transparency, you never know. Like what might be okay on their channel might not be on mine. Okay, that looks like a narrow miss. It looks like it's getting stopped, and I'm not seeing contact with the blade, or like any contact with the opponent's sword. So maybe there's a hit to the arm, and they just don't count it because. Oh wait, is that a hit to the forearm on the left as well? No, I still see a shadow, so I guess not. So no hit there. You know, one thing I don't understand about this, I mean, there's several things I don't understand, but one thing is, if you're gonna do this with no protection, aside from the modern Mensur style guard for the eyes and nose, why are you swinging like this? Not that they're not controlled, they are moving with control, but I would want to see very compact movements that are just like little snaps, like little quick taps to the head or whatever, because you don't need to build all of this. You don't need to build momentum. You're not trying to literally cleave each other's heads. You just need to pop it. But it looks like a considerable amount of force involved here. So if you don't catch that, well, in particular that, if you don't defend against that, you're in trouble. This is not just a tiny little cut that draws a bit of blood. This is ER time. Comes all the way around for a It's where a cow or thwarting cut. If you don't catch that, yikes. That could be a significant injury. And then this one as well. There's a lot of force, and it does not look like they're pulling it. It looks like, they must be pulling it to some extent, but that's quite a lot. I don't see why you would take such a risk. For what benefit? I'll get more into that later. Okay, was that a hit? Again, they're experienced. You know, I recognize the techniques. There's a shield how or squinting strike. This one here seems to land on the grip in between the hands, and that also shows you another big problem here. These gloves do not have a lot of padding. So and again, this hits with a reasonable amount of force. Well, unreasonable, I guess, in this case. If this landed 1 centimeter looks like 1 or 2 centimeters further up, this would be the pinky finger. And that would be broken, most likely. So you really dodged an ER trip right there. I really don't understand, why would you raise the foot while you're cutting? I have seen this before. Personally, I much prefer more solid footwork where you have a stable platform, both feet on the ground, unless you're stepping. This is just too wobbly, in my opinion. Maybe this is in the manuscript somewhere, and the instructors that I learned from have just omitted that because they were looking at it like, nah, biomechanically this is a bad idea. And yeah, that's what I think, but yeah, feel free to argue, of course. Okay, was there a hit there? Okay, so parry, and then the counter comes in the form of a Sturzhau or plunging cut, which is nice to see. So can't argue with that. That's a proper technique, right? Which lands again on the grip. Could have hit a hand. And then after this, that looks like did that hit the forearm? Might have just slapped the back of the hand with the flat. Okay, so there's a quick shield how to the head that doesn't land. Counter comes around. Wait, did it hit you? I can't tell, but maybe this hit. Yeah, there might be very light contact here. It's always hard to see when something is behind someone in a video. Yeah, it must have been that one. Okay, that's a pretty nice exchange. So I have to say, when I first saw this, I thought, oh no, this is going to be some stupid shit, isn't it? But no, actually watching it, I have to say, they do have enough control. For now, I do think there's a very high risk of injury beyond what they're trying to do. I mean, each of those bleeding scalp cuts is an injury, technically, but there's a lot of potential for this to go very wrong and lead to much worse injuries. Again, broken fingers, broken hand, cracked skull or worse, knocked out teeth. That's a big concern. Yeah, they know how to defend. You know, they attack with control. You know, they clearly are good at timing and distance management and all that. Footwork is mostly good except this kind of stuff. I don't know what that... Biomechanically, that's not a good idea, but... Okay. Is there a hit here? Oh, right. The guy on the left is just taking it right in the face, isn't he? Yeah, like straight up, hopefully on the goggles. Yeah. My dude, what is this? Okay, I keep harping on about that. Like, I've just admitted that this might be something, like this might be some interpretation of some manuscript. No, I don't think so. This looks like something that would have its own name in an anime, but I can't imagine that's a correct interpretation of anything in any of the manuscripts. Correct me if I'm wrong. Not that I haven't done weird things in sparring, because they happen sometimes, so there might be something here. While the blade drops, that's probably it. Yeah. Yeah, look at this. If he hadn't defended against that, sure, his sword was already there, so that was easy enough to defend against. But if he hadn't, if that had hit his head, that would be ambulance time, I'm pretty sure. In fact, the response to that as well, boom, that comes around with some oomph. Why would you take that risk? For what exactly? Yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, this is about halfway through, and if you want to see all of it, you can go to their channel and watch it there. A few more thoughts here. I don't really know what they're trying to recreate here, because it's not quite Meyer style sport fencing to first blood, because they're wearing the modern Mensur masks, so that's already a deviation from that. And in terms of rules and technique, I mean, yeah, it's Meyer-esque overall, but the rules are different, and they're not wearing the fabulous outfits that are necessary to make this really authentic. And then, they could be doing actual Mensur fencing, but that's very different implements. The Schlager saber with a very thin blade, thin and kind of floppy, and basket hilts. Nick is saying that, or implying that they learned a lot, because someone asked, what did you learn? Apparently enough to fill an entire video. So if those guys feel they learned something, I mean, they're consenting adults, but it might still inspire some stupid imitation by young dudes with a chip on their shoulder and this and that, and people who don't have the skill and control required to do this without braining each other. And yeah, brain, that's my main concern here, because cumulative brain damage is a risk even when you're fencing with protective masks, because every time you get a concussion, what is that? Brain damage. It's irreversible, it adds up, and particularly if the goal is to hit each other in the head, that's a really bad idea. It might not look like much, but you're constantly taking impacts with a piece of steel to the head. Yes, you will get brain damage. It's almost guaranteed. The question is just how much. It's gradual. You're not going to notice. And in fact, you might not notice until you get older. Like, this is the kind of thing where you might think, oh, it's okay, just a little bit of a bleed. I have a little bit of a headache, but otherwise I'm fine. And then when you're, 65 or 70 or whatever, suddenly you have, whatever, you get Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or whatever. I mean, it is a lower risk than, say, boxing and MMA, where the goal is to knock the other guy out. That's actually much higher risk. So to be fair, it's not that bad at that time. Safety, what's that? They had no concept of that. I mean, generally people in history did so many insane things that would make you think they have like some kind of Star Trek tech that can repair anything without permanent crippling injuries, where it was in fact the opposite, where their standard of medicine meant that even fairly minor things may have led to amputations and whatnot. So they took insane risks for no benefit other than, I'm so macho, by removing certain target areas, or by saying, okay, you have to do this, you have to do like bleeding scalp cut or whatever. It makes it artificial. This is no longer sword fighting the way, say, Fiore would have taught it in the 15th century. It's a very different thing. To an extent, this is a criticism that would apply to fencing in the 16th century. Not counting hits to the arms and legs is a big limitation. If you use these big sweeping cuts while excluding the arms as a valid target, and you practice this way, and then you fight someone in a tournament, or like in a hypothetical real sword fight to the death in history, you would get wrecked by someone who doesn't practice that way. Like, for example, the Schnitt, which is a slicing push or pull cut to the arms. And the way that works is if there's a bind and one guy leaves the bind to come around with his big cut, the other guy feels the blade leaves the bind, immediately goes for the slice. It's done. The slice is actually the counter to this. And generally targeting the arms would shut down a lot of what they're doing here. So, yeah, I don't get it. Like, why? Again, they can do whatever they want. They are mature, consenting adults. And technique-wise, it's way better than I expected. But still not something I would recommend in any way, shape, or form. Let's see what my instructor thinks. Well, I wasn't expecting him to pull any punches, and he didn't. I can't agree that Meyer is rubbish, but I also do have to admit that I'm somewhat biased because that's what I started out with. That's what most of what I know is based on. Well, on an interpretation of that. My instructors were very, cherry picky when it comes to what to teach and what to change and what to leave out. And I can see why. This was already a sportified version of sword fighting back in his day. I mean, even though people still fought with swords, obviously, but this particular form was for, recreational fencing and formal dueling, whereas Fiore, for example, is for self-defense on the street and battlefield use. And I found out in sparring that at least the interpretation of Meyer that I was taught is very weak against Zayan's Fiore. I mean, sure, there's a skill difference at play as well, but just like fundamentally, a lot of the things that are taken from Fiore that Zayan does will just straight up shut down the tactics that I attempt to use. I mean, not so much anymore, I've learned my lesson. But I do have to agree, a quick cut to the wrist ends a lot of this. And yeah, full force, Sorakawa, it's over, yeah. It works if the opponent uses the same. This does make me look at Meyer a little differently because I can tell that these guys are good. Like, they are doing Meyer. It's very clear, easy to recognize all the techniques and everything. Like, that's not the issue. But, in this particular form, it's not the full picture. It's not proper sword fighting, if you will. It's, again, sporterized and formalized, so to speak. Particularly this rule set of first bleeding cut puts severe limitations on it and makes the practice somewhat artificial, in my opinion. On the same channel, they do also have footage of sparring in full gear, and that looks much better to me. And that very much looks like what I'm used to. That is indeed proper Meyer, skilled and everything. And this is more martially viable as well, in my book. It still gets shut down by systems that have tighter movements, I find. But I will say that the one thing I always like about Meyer is that it's pretty devastating cuts. This is all like full, from the shoulder, full rotation, full follow through. When they land, they're devastating, and it's pretty useful for cutting practice as well, which is also on that channel. So if you get hit by one of these cuts, it's so over, but they also telegraph a little more than, more retracted, compacted, little snap cuts with a push-pull motion and things of that nature. I have to say there is another video where they do this, with minimal gear, just the Mensur style eye and nose guard. This actually looks better to me than the other one, but at the same time, oh boy, they're going at it with a lot of intensity, which worries me. It's impressive, that they can do that without immediately, breaking bones and whatever, seriously messing each other up and putting each other in the hospital. So I have to give them credit for that. The skill on display here is impressive. I'm just worried about something serious happening eventually. Like, this really looks like someone might end up in the hospital with a skull fracture or worse. But until then, I can't help but respect it. You know? Even though, again, it's all under the disclaimer of don't do it. And I agree that you don't really have that much to gain from it due to these limitations. I do understand minimal gear, slow work, and sparring, like with just fencing masks and gloves. Even though it's a higher risk, if you're experienced enough and have enough control to do it safely, it can be good because it is different, and the bulk of the protective gear is a downside. It's a hindrance and it makes everything more awkward. You can't move as well as you would like and all of that. So I get that, but this, like, the goal to draw blood, what do you folks think? Was I being too nice? Hope you found it interesting or amusing or whatever else. Thanks for watching, and don't risk brain damage, folks. It ain't worth it. And once you have brain damage to begin with, you might do even more things that exacerbate it. So it's a downward spiral.